Welcome to a night where shadows have a voice. Candle flames breathe like living beings, and even the wind seems to whisper names no one else dares to say. This is a night made of mist, golden leaves, and mystery. A place between sleep and whisper, where legends slowly rise, only to make sure you stay lying down. Our journey begins in the woods of Sleepy Hollow, where pumpkins light the way and the horseman's laughter still echoes. Then we head to the cold mountains of Transylvania, where castles breathe and politeness can be deadly. We'll also pass through the electric laboratories of the human mind, between lightning and regret, before crossing the frozen ravine of the phantom carriage, and ending at the edge of the whisper that drives you mad, when even the heart itself decides to speak louder than reason. If you enjoy stories where fear arrives gently, dressed in elegant clothes and smelling of candle wax, like the video and subscribe for more cozily eerie bedtime tales. This episode is part of our Halloween special, a collection of stories to soothe and spooky, inspired by Gothic classics that survived time, fire, and even their own authors. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is, because there's something strangely comforting about falling asleep to haunted bridges, forbidden labs, and hearts that never find rest. Now, turn off the lights, pull up the blanket, and let the shadows settle just close enough to listen. The night is only beginning, and like every good Halloween story, it promises not to leave anyone completely awake. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Among the gentle hills and golden valleys of New York, there is a village where time moves a little slower. Sleepy Hollow rests beneath a blanket of dry leaves and lingering mist, as if autumn itself had decided to settle there. The wooden houses creak softly in the wind, and the windows glow with the warm light of candles. In the air floats the scent of baked apples, cider, and wood smoke. The tree branches arch over the roads, forming tunnels of shadow and gold. In the afternoon, the bells of the little school ring lazily, echoing through fields and streams. Villagers walk unhurriedly, greeting one another like those repeating an ancient ritual. It's a place where stories have a life of their own, and ghosts are treated with courtesy. At night, when the moon rises behind the oaks, the entire village seems to hold its breath. And if one listens closely, they could swear the wind murmurs names from centuries past. It was to this corner of the world that Ichabod Crane arrived, thin, awkward, with eyes hungry for knowledge and dessert. He came from afar, bringing only books, faith, and a charming willingness to believe in everything. He was the village's new schoolmaster, and the children followed him with laughter and awe. His angular face and strangely musical voice became part of the local scenery. Ichabod was respectful, polite, and had the habit of listening to stories with near religious devotion. He was superstitious to the bone, feared black cats, crooked crosses, and wind from the north. But nothing delighted him more than a well-set table after hours. He became a regular presence on the farms, always welcome for his polite manner and his legendary appetite. It was said he loved pies as much as he loved rumors, and it was at one of these dinners that he first heard the name Katrina Van Tassel. The only daughter of a wealthy farmer, she was the most coveted jewel of Sleepy Hollow. Her light laughter floated through the air like glass bells, and even the wind seemed to lean in to listen. When Ichabod met her, he forgot his letters and remembered his dreams. From then on, everything he read sounded like a poem about her, and his ambition, or perhaps his heart, took the shape of plans. But where there is enchantment, there is also rivalry. Brom Bones, the boldest and most popular young man in the village, was also courting Katrina. He was Ichabod's opposite, strong, confident, the owner of a fast horse and loud laughter. He joined races, parties, and contests of bravery, always walking away with stories to tell. They said no one rode like him, and even the wind followed him out of respect. Between the two men grew a polite but noticeable tension. Ichabod, with his gentle manners, tried to win the girl's heart through patience and words. Brom preferred to do it with boldness and charm. Katrina, curious, enjoyed the competition. She liked the serenades as much as the nervous glances. And the village, of course, watched everything, whispering theories by the wells. Deep down, everyone knew that story wouldn't end with just a dance. Fate, around here, was known to wait on the corners of the night, and autumn seemed to be setting the stage for something yet unnamed. Even the trees, restless, swayed as if sensing the inevitable. Days passed, and the great harvest ball approached. Families decorated barns with garlands and glowing pumpkins. The girls prepared new dresses, and the boys sharpened stories of courage. It was the most anticipated night of the year, when legends mingled with laughter. Ichabod saw his chance to impress Katrina, win over her father, and maybe change his fate. As the afternoon bells echoed, he practiced in the mirror his gallant gestures and dance steps. The cold wind blew through the cracks, bringing the distant scent of bonfires. On the horizon, the fields shimmered with the gold of hanging lanterns. The village looked like a dream scene, and every dream story needs a proper scare. That night, the doors of the Van Tassel house opened to music, light, and fate, and no one imagined just how much fate could dance. The hall was full and warm, lit by dozens of candles flickering in the windows. The tables overflowed with cakes, cider, and laughter. Brombones arrived first, laughing loudly and greeting everyone with the vigor of a farm king. But when Ichabod entered, in a new coat and with a determined look, the atmosphere seemed to shift. He found Katrina near the fireplace and bowed with the grace of an old tale. They danced together, light and smiling, while shadows spun around them. The music rose, the laughter echoed, and for a moment it seemed the schoolmaster had triumphed over fate. But the night still held its darkest chapter. When the music stopped, the elders gathered near the fire. It was time for ghost stories, a sacred tradition in Sleepy Hollow. Between sips of cider and bursts of laughter, they began to speak of the headless horseman. They said he was a soldier killed in battle, doomed to ride in search of his lost head, that he appeared on the roads at night, carrying a flaming pumpkin in place of a face, and that no one, not even the wind, dared follow him past the old bridge. The fire cracked, the laughter faded, and Ichabod listened to every word. By the time the party ended, the moon was high and the fields were veiled in mist. Ichabod mounted his borrowed horse, a nervous, bony creature, more skeleton than steed. The road home was long, flanked by trees whispering with the wind. His lantern swung in his hand, casting shaky circles of light. The forest sounds, crickets, owls, rustling leaves, seemed to form a secret language. The schoolmaster's heart beat in time with the horse's trot. Then suddenly, he heard something new, a second set of hooves, distant but steady. He turned, lantern flame trembling. Nothing, just mist. He moved on, quickening the pace. The sound returned, closer now, heavier. Ichabod felt the cold run down his spine and pulled the reins. There, at the curve in the road, a shadow took shape. Tall, hooded, mounted on a black horse. And where a head should have been, there was nothing. The blood drained from his face, and the lantern nearly slipped from his hand. The rider, still and silent, seemed to watch without eyes. Then, in one swift motion, he raised an arm and pointed forward, commanding the impossible, "Run." Ichabod kicked his horse, which bolted in panic, galloping down the narrow road. Behind him, the second gallop thundered like a storm. The trees became blurs of shadow and wind. The teacher's heart pounded in his chest. fear burning in his breath. The lantern swung wildly, scattering broken light along the path. The horseman's laugh echoed, deep, distant, yet alive. Ichabod screamed, more from terror than hope. The bridge was near. He remembered the legend the spectre couldn't cross it. If he reached it, he'd be safe. With desperate strength, he pushed forward. The bridge's wood groaned under the hooves, creaking like old bones. For a second, the world hung suspended. The wind blew hard, and the moonlight revealed the horseman close behind. In his hand burned an orange sphere, a flaming pumpkin. With a swift motion, he hurled it. The object flew in an arc, lighting the dark like a small sun. Ichabod screamed, ducking low. The pumpkin struck the ground with a crash and exploded in flame. The horse shot across the bridge, and silence fell like a curtain. The lantern went out, leaving only the scent of smoke and fear. No one saw anything else that night. The river flowed on, carrying leaves and the echo of hooves, and the moon, indifferent, merely watched the emptiness left behind. The next morning, the village woke to the news spreading like mist. Ichabod's hat was found near the bridge. Beside it, an empty saddle, and a little further, a shattered, scorched pumpkin. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints, and only silence and wind. Katrina heard the tale in silence. Brom Bones, they say, only smiled. A brief, unreadable smile. Some swore they'd seen him laugh when telling the story for the first time. As the days passed, the schoolhouse sat empty, and the village returned to its slow rhythm. Children whispered, pointing toward the woods at dusk. The elders avoided the bridge after sundown, and Ichabod's name became a memory the wind still speaks. The legend, however, grew, and Sleepy Hollow breathed as it always had, because here every absence becomes myth, and every myth, sooner or later, rides again. Some say Ichabod fled that night and found refuge in a distant town. Others swear he still rides through the mist, trying to outrun the spectre's laugh. There are those who claim they've seen two shadows crossing the road when the moon is full, but no one dares to check. Sleepy Hollow remains unchanged, quiet, golden, eternal in its autumn. The leaves keep falling, and the bridge still groans. At every twilight, the river reflects a strange glow, orange, fleeting, and always at the same hour. The school bell rings on its own when the wind comes from the east, and if you listen closely, you'll hear distant hoofbeats, tangled with the rustle of trees. The horseman still rides, they say, and on the longest nights, the echo of his hooves tells a story with no end, a story of fear, love, and the price of chasing one's own desire. Because in Sleepy Hollow, nothing ever truly leaves, it only changes shape, and every legend, sooner or later, finds its way home. Dracula. From the quiet hills of Sleepy Hollow, we now head east, where the mist takes on the metallic taste of the mountains. Jonathan Harker has been traveling for days along winding roads, rocked by the constant creaking of the carriage wheels. With every mile, the world grows older, colder, quieter. The villages grow fewer, the windows shut before sunset, and the dogs howl without apparent reason. The wind blows in sharp gusts, carrying the scent of iron and ice. The sky turns purple before plunging into darkness, and the pine trees whisper as if gossiping about the traveler. Jonathan clutches the crucifix an old woman gave him at the last inn. For protection, she had said, before hurriedly shutting the door. The horses snort, weary, and the wheels kick up clouds of fine snow. There's an invisible weight in the air, as if each hill is watching his passage. And in the distance, at a bend in the road, an unmoving shadow appears. The coachman points. The Count's castle. The clouds part, revealing towers sharp as fangs against the moonlight. Dracula's castle rises above the abyss, built of ancient stone and frozen wind. The narrow bridge leading to the gate seems suspended over nothingness, swaying slightly under the hooves. Jonathan's stomach turns, but he continues, drawn by the promise of hospitality. The doors open with a metallic groan, and a tall figure waits at the entrance. A pale man, with elegant movements and a deep, unreadable gaze. His smile is far too polite to be comforting. "Welcome to my house, Mr. Harker," says the Count, in an accent that seems to echo across centuries. The voice is soft, yet it chills the air. Jonathan bows and a shiver runs up his spine. The Count leads him through long corridors, where the portraits seem to follow with their eyes. The stone floor echoes footsteps that sound like more than one pair. Candelabras cast flickering light, and the air smells of old wax and dust. There are no servants, no signs of life, only the crackling of a distant fire and the rustling of curtains. The castle breathes, but slowly. Dinner is served at a lavish table, though only Jonathan eats. The Count watches still, as if feeding only on silence. "You must be tired from the journey," he says, and Jonathan forces a smile. There's something in the Count's voice that slips between the words, like mist. They speak of London, of business, of the vastness of the modern world. But whenever Jonathan mentions the sun, the Count looks away. The candle flames dance, casting shadows denser than they should be. At some point, Jonathan notices the Count does not eat, does not drink, does not breathe deeply, and when he raises a glass to toast, no shadow moves on the wall behind him. A chill runs through Jonathan's body, but he masks it with a smile. The night stretches on, and the clock marks hours no one feels passing. "Rest well," says the Count, his voice both a farewell and a warning. Jonathan retires, but sleep does not come. Outside, wolves howl out long continuous like prayers to the moon, and somewhere, light footsteps cross the corridor without touching the ground. The following days are a blend of fascination and unease. Jonathan explores the castle and finds locked doors, corridors ending in walls. From some windows, he sees only emptiness, the cliff diving into mist. At night, he hears voices without owners, distant laughter, and a whisper that calls his name. During the day, the Count appears cordial, always in the shadows, always smiling. Jonathan's letters to London mysteriously vanish. Time loses shape. Mornings feel like nights, and nights feel endless. In his diary, he writes in trembling script, "I feel I am both guest and prisoner." The mirrors, once decorative, now disturb him, not because they show his face, but because they don't show the Count's. One morning, while shaving, he sees the Count behind him, motionless. Startled, he cuts his finger. The Count lunges forward, eyes glowing with a silent crimson. But when he sees the crucifix around Jonathan's neck, he recoils, as if burned. He smiles, and that smile reveals canines far too long. Jonathan understands, too late, that politeness was only the first bite. Night falls like a heavy cloak over the towers. Jonathan wakes to the sound of chains and wind against distant windows. He leaves his room, guided by an instinct he cannot name. The castle feels more alive than ever, each wall pulsing under the moonlight. As he descends a spiral staircase, the air grows colder. The corridor ends in a large circular room, lit only by a pale beam of moonlight. 3 women are there, pale, beautiful, with golden eyes and ancient thirst. They call to him with soft, almost childlike voices. Jonathan cannot move, as if the air has turned to liquid. One of them touches his face, and the cold invades his skin. He feels the sweet breath, the scent of something forbidden, but before her mouth touches his neck, A voice echoes through the chamber. "Well, my ladies, this man is mine." The Count emerges from the shadows, eyes blazing like embers in the night. The women retreat, and silence becomes the loudest sound in the castle once more. From that moment on, the fear stops being subtle. Jonathan realizes the doors are locked from the inside, and the windows are barred with rusted iron. He tries them one by one, but they resist, as if the castle itself has a will. The days crawl, and the Count rarely appears. When he does, he speaks of London, of old cemeteries, empty churches, and streets where the sun barely enters. Jonathan finds maps and notes. The Count plans to travel, to buy properties, to spread like a shadow, and in every word there is a hunger no meal could ever satisfy. During his explorations, Jonathan finds a tall window forgotten in a side tower. The bars are rusted, the stone around them brittle, as if time had started the work he now needed to finish. For several nights, he weakens the screws with a dinner knife and a candle holder. His hands are cut. Blood mixes with dust, but hope keeps him standing. One night, as he looks out, he sees the Count crawling down the wall, like a spider descending in silence. Jonathan's heart clenches. He understands finally that the castle is a prison, and that this window, imperfect, loose, is his only escape. His plan is born amid thunder. Jonathan waits until the sound of footsteps fades, and the castle sinks into silence. With trembling hands, he removes the last bar still holding the window shut. The night wind floods the room, cold and damp, carrying the metallic scent of the towers. He fashions ropes from bedsheets, ties them to the frame, and begins his descent. The air strikes him hard, filled with snowflakes and fear. The castle stones are slick with moss and age, as slippery as ice. Every movement is a prayer, every breath a risk. Below, the river gnaws at the rocks with a sound like teeth. Above, the thunder reveals wings, bats circling, as if the castle itself knew of his escape. He doesn't look back. He slips, nearly falls, but keeps going. When his feet finally touch the ground, his whole body shakes with relief and disbelief. He runs down the hillside, stumbling over roots, fleeing without direction. Behind him, Dracula's castle stands still, and yet it watches. Days later, a small village finds a man collapsed on the road. He's feverish, pale, murmuring words about a castle and soulless creatures. The women take him in, make soups, and the priests pray. But at night, the man raves, calling out a name no one understands, Dracula. He speaks of windows that open by themselves, of bodiless voices, and the scent of iron in the air. The villagers listen and make the sign of the cross. When he wakes, he remembers almost nothing and only the cold. And yet, something has stayed within him. A deeper gaze, a shadow in his dreams. Months pass, and he returns to England, trying to forget. But sometimes, when the rain falls soft and the wind blows from the east, Jonathan still hears the creak of a carriage and feels, on the back of his neck, the same air that once swept through the Transylvanian peaks. Meanwhile, in London, the docks receive a silent ship. The captain is dead, the sails torn, and no crew on board. Only a single crate, packed with dark soil, is removed and delivered to an old mansion. That night, the city's dogs howl, and a shadow crosses the streets, moving without sound. Street lamps flicker in its wake, and the fog seems to part for it. Inside sleeping homes, curtains sway, and a sweet scent seeps into the air. Someone swears they saw a tall man in a long cloak, red eyes glowing, standing beneath a gaslight. Others say it was just the echo of a dream. But no one dreams the same thing twice, and London, unaware, gains a new resident, one who prefers the night. Count Dracula vanishes into the city like a secret feeding on silence. Jonathan Harker tries to resume his life, but something within him never returns. There are moments when he wakes before dawn, convinced he hears wings at the window. Other times, he swears he sees the Count's face reflected in the rainwater. Time moves on, but the chill of Transylvania clings to him like a scent that never fades. And there, in the mountains where it all began, the castle remains, empty yet alert. Doors creak in the wind, corridors echo footsteps that belong to no one. And they say that on foggy nights, one can hear a low voice, almost a whisper. How gentle he was and how empty his shadow. The sound mixes with the beating of wings and vanishes into the rain, and the mist, satisfied, closes the scene until the next traveler dares to cross the bridge. Frankenstein. They say every horror story begins with curiosity, and for Victor Frankenstein it was no different. He was a young man with a brilliant mind, fascinated by anything that sparked. Lightning, metals, sparks, ideas. Born in Geneva, surrounded by books and storms, he learned early never to settle for simple answers. While others saw thunder, he saw questions. While others slept, he studied what pulses between sky and earth. In the makeshift lab of his bedroom, bottles bubbled, gears spun, and the air smelled of ozone. They called him a dreamer, and he smiled, because to dream, after all, is a verb that requires courage. But curiosity is a flame that, if left unchecked, learns to burn. And Victor didn't just want to understand life, he wanted to create it. Night after night, he dove into forbidden books, alchemists' notes, medical treatises, and stolen secrets, his hands stained with ink, his eyes carrying the look of someone who had crossed a line and couldn't go back. Outside, winter winds beat at the windows. Inside, something was being born, something that had no name, and no storm outside could match the one he was igniting within. The idea grew like a stubborn seed. Victor believed death was nothing more than an electrical failure. If the soul is energy, he thought, then surely there was a right voltage to reignite it. He set up a lab in an isolated shed, where the ceiling dripped and the floor was cold as marble. The sound of gears mixed with the clink of metal and the distant rumble of thunder. The smell of iron and oil coated everything, and the candlelight flickered across the walls like restless ghosts. There, among vials and wires, he gathered fragments, pieces of body and hope. He worked until his fingers bled, driven by a faith too large for reason. Every bolt, every stitch, every inch of skin was a prayer to science and pride. Victor's heart beat too fast, as if trying to match the rhythm of his creations. The night he had chosen for the experiment arrived, wrapped in lightning. The air smelled of rain and anticipation. The sky roared, as if God himself were breathing too close. And for a moment, Victor believed eternity was listening. Then he pulled the final lever. A flash tore through the ceiling and lit the lab like a miniature day. Wires buzzed, coils groaned, and the smell of ozone mixed with that of heated flesh. Victor stood still, watching the body on the table. First, a spasm, then another, and then the impossible. The eyes opened, not with sweetness, but with the primordial void of someone seeing for the very first time. The creature breathed. Its chest rose, the coarse sound of life mixing with thunder. Victor took a step back, his heart pounding against his ribs. The feeling he had expected, triumph, ecstasy, never came, only terror. The creature sat up slowly and looked at him. It was tall, disproportionate, sewn together from threads of humanity and solitude. And in that gaze, Victor saw the exact reflection of his own sin. Panicked, he fled. He stumbled over instruments, soaked in sweat and the rain slipping through the cracks. He ran into the empty streets while the city slept, unaware of what had been born beneath its skin. Behind him, the sound of heavy, hesitant steps, like a newborn trying to understand the ground. Victor didn't look back. Fascination had turned to fear. In his room, trembling, he blew out every candle and waited for dawn. But when he opened his eyes, the world was no longer the same. He dreamed of yellow eyes and giant hands stretching from the dark. He dreamed of a voiceless mouth and a formless question. When he returned to the lab, the body was gone. The table empty, the floor marked with wide, wet footprints, and the wind blowing through the open windows sounded like a warning. His creation had learned to walk. The days that followed were silent torment. Victor fell ill, consumed by guilt and fever. He tried to study, but every page seemed written with the creature's name. His heartbeat echoed like hammers, mimicking the thunder from that night. Friends came to visit, worried by his pallor. They spoke of life, love, lightness, words that now felt foreign. Victor smiled, but inside he felt the weight of having pulled nature's strings. In feverish absences, he saw flashes of a deformed face beneath the rain, the creature, alone in the world, maybe wandering forests, trying to understand its own reflection, perhaps crying, perhaps screaming, perhaps learning to become something. And then fear took a second shape, compassion. Victor began to fear less for his life and more for what he had done with another's. Because when you play at being creator, the punishment is watching your creation learn what pain is. And pain is what makes all things human, even what should never have been. Months passed before he saw him again. It was on a snowy path near the family's country house. Victor was walking alone, trying to escape himself, when he heard heavy steps following. He turned, and there it was, the creature, wrapped in rags, its face burned by cold and rejection. The eyes, still the same, now carried something new, sorrow. It didn't approach, only spoke. The voice was rough, broken, but clear. "You gave me life," it said, "and then denied me everything that makes life bearable." Victor felt the air leave his lungs. The creature spoke of its suffering, the screams, the stones, the fear in people's eyes, of cold, hunger, solitude, of how it had learned to speak, to read, to hate. "I was born good," it said, "but the world taught me the rest." Victor tried to answer, but the words died in his throat. The silence between them was more human than any sound. The creature asked only one thing, companionship. "Make me someone like me," it said, "someone who won't fear my face." It promised that, if granted this, it would leave forever, to a place where no man would ever hear its name again. Victor hesitated. He knew repeating the mistake would double the abyss, but he also knew what it felt like to be alone. During sleepless nights, he imagined what would become of the creature without tenderness. Perhaps true horror was living without any mirror at all. He decided to accept, out of duty, pity, fear, and began again. He built a new lab hidden in Scotland, far from the eyes of the world. There, among storms and crashing waves, he started again, wires, stitches, lightning. But as the new form took shape, the weight of his conscience grew, and when the storm finally formed on the horizon, Victor understood he could not bear to see it again. On the appointed night, the creature waited outside, beneath the rain. Victor looked at the table and felt the same chill as before. Sparks flashed, thunder roared, and the lifeless body beneath the sheet seemed to breathe. But something inside him shattered. With a single blow, he destroyed the second creation before it could open its eyes. The thunder answered like a scream from the sky. The creature, seeing what he had done, let out a roar, a sound that mixed rage and despair. "Now you know what it is to be me," it said, before disappearing into the storm. Days later, Victor received word. His younger brother had been found dead, and beside the body, giant footprints. Regret came too late, as it always does, and the man who had wanted to master death began at last to die from within. The pursuit lasted for years. Victor wandered through mountains, deserts, and frozen seas, chasing traces that were always one step ahead. The cold consumed him, the body weakened, but guilt kept him on his feet. The creature left messages written in the snow, like open wounds. "Follow me to the end." It became a game of mirrors, a creator hunting his creation, not realizing they had become the same being. Both tired, both starving, both trapped by what they had awakened. In a frozen cave, Victor finally saw him, still, calm, staring at the horizon. The wind howled through the rocks, and the ice creaked beneath their feet. They stood face to face, and there was no hatred, only exhaustion. "You are my punishment," said Victor. "And you, my father," replied the creature. Between them, only snow and the distant sound of the dawn. Then, emptiness. Days later, a ship found Victor adrift in the Arctic. He was brought aboard, feverish, murmuring about fire, thunder, and yellow eyes. He told his story to the captain, who listened in silence, unsure if it was madness or myth. Before dawn, Victor died, peaceful, like someone finally surrendering to forgetfulness. When the captain returned to the cabin, the window was open, and next to the body, a hunched shadow wept quietly. It was him. The creature looked at the pale face of his creator and whispered something the wind carried away. Then he climbed to the deck, walking into the fog. He raised his eyes to the grey sky and let himself fall onto the ice, disappearing into the dark waters. And for a brief moment, the sea seemed to shimmer, as if embracing the final spark of a divided soul. Since then, they say that in northern storms, you can hear two hearts beating within the thunder. One beat of a man, the other of everything he dared to create. The Phantom Coach. The storm had begun without warning, as they often do when they feel ancient. The sky, once grey, darkened in an instant, and the wind lifted the snow in sharp spirals. The traveller rode on, following a trail nearly invisible, guided only by tired instinct. It was late afternoon, but the horizon had already vanished beneath the weight of the clouds. His soaked cloak clung to his body, and his fingers, stiff with cold, barely held the reins. The horse exhaled in steaming bursts that turned to mist in the icy air. All around there was only white and silence, a silence so deep it ached. No birdsong, no human echo, only the distant howling of wind. With every step, the snow reached his knees, and the world seemed to close in. Then he saw it, between shadows and ice crystals, a point of light. Small, yellow, flickering like a candle trying to outlast the night. As unlikely as it seemed, he followed it. Because on nights like this, a light is more than hope. It's salvation. And every salvation has its price. The cabin appeared suddenly, as if it had grown out of the mist. Small, crooked, its roof heavy with snow and a chimney coughing smoke. The traveller knocked, and a raspy voice answered from inside. "Enter, man of luck or of despair." The wood gave way, and warmth wrapped around him like a long-forgotten embrace. Inside, a fire burned in an iron stove, and the air smelled of toasted bread and warm wine. An elderly woman stirred a pot, her face glowing in the firelight. At the back, a tall man watched him, light eyes, lumberjack's hands, the look of someone who lives between cold and fear. The traveler thanked them, still shivering, and accepted a steaming mug. The heat ran down his throat and sparked life in his limbs again. "Lost your way?" the man asked, pouring more wine. "For hours," the traveler replied. "Just looking for shelter until morning." The host nodded slowly, eyes on the storm outside the window. "It's a long night. No Christian should be crossing these fields now." And yet his gaze seemed heavy with something left unsaid. As wind rattled the walls, they spoke of roads and distances. The traveler learned the house stood isolated, between hills and frozen marshes. The residents saw few visitors, and even fewer after dark. But their hospitality was quiet and sincere. The woman served thick, hot soup, rich with garlic and bay leaf. With every spoonful, the world slowly returned to him. The fire crackled, sounding like distant fireworks. The traveler's body began to relax, his mind slipping into the comfort of safety. But the woodsman sitting across from the fire remained alert. His gaze drifted between the flames and the window, as if waiting for someone. "You shouldn't be here alone," he muttered to himself. "There are paths that open only to those who get lost." The traveler looked up, puzzled, but the man simply gave a tired smile and stood. "Maybe there's still time to avoid the worst. Wait here." He stepped out into the cold, letting the door creak shut behind him. The old woman sighed and poured more wine. "Forgive my husband," she said. "He hasn't slept well in many winters." The traveler nodded, leaning back in his chair, lulled by the fire's steady warmth. But the clock on the wall began to tick oddly, too slow. The wind outside blew with a new kind of force, as if it knew what was coming. Then came a sound, distant, deep, rhythmic. The traveler sat upright. It wasn't the wind, it was the sound of hooves. It grew louder, approaching from the valley, steady, measured, unmistakable. A carriage. The old woman looked up and whispered, "It's too late for that." But the man returned, bringing a gust of snow and news no one expected. "There's a coach passing on the upper road. They're taking passengers." The traveler hesitated. "In this storm?" The man simply nodded. "They've taken this route before. Know the roads better than anyone." The old woman, pale, placed a hand on the table. "Don't go," she whispered. "Not every coach carries the living." The traveler chuckled, thinking it superstition, but her expression remained serious, almost pleading. Still, the idea of continuing the journey was more tempting than being trapped all night. He thanked them for their kindness, wrapped his cloak tighter and stepped outside. The wind hit him hard, and the snow stung his face like glass. Down on the road, he saw moving lights, lanterns swinging, a golden glow against the white. He heard the hooves, felt the ground vibrate. And strange as it seemed, the coach truly waited. The driver raised his lantern, and the traveler hurried down the path. The carriage was large, made of dark wood and iron wheels coated in ice. The horses, black and steaming, exhaled like furnaces. The coachman wore a heavy hood, his voice rasping when he asked the destination. "The nearest village," said the traveler. "I'll pay well." The man only nodded. The carriage door creaked open, and the cold air inside smelled of old leather. 3 passengers sat within. None looked up. They wore old-fashioned, heavy clothes, and their skin was as pale as snow. The traveler greeted them with a nod. No one responded. Only the sound of hooves and creaking wheels broke the silence. For a while, he tried to convince himself it was only fatigue and coincidence, but the air was too heavy. And the cold inside the coach, it wasn't natural. It felt as if the journey wasn't through land, but between worlds. The coach sped onward, slicing through the wind, climbing unseen hills and descending into invisible valleys. Outside, the storm howled, but inside, There was absolute silence. The traveller glanced at the windows, but what he saw wasn't his reflection. It was darkness, dense, unmoving, endless. The man across from him seemed to be dozing, yet his eyes remained open. The woman beside him wore a faint smile, lit too still, too perfect. A new chill crept up the traveller's spine. The carriage turned sharply, and for a heartbeat, through the slit in the curtain, he could have sworn he saw a cliff. The coachman didn't slow. The hooves pounded with a rhythm that defied reason. "Sir!" the traveller called, pounding on the wooden wall. No reply. The sound of hooves grew louder, nearly deafening. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. The coach stood still. The traveller breathed fast, heart out of rhythm. He looked around. The other passengers hadn't moved. The coachman opened the door and silently pointed outside. He stepped down, his boots sinking into the snow. The storm had ceased, and the silence was almost solid. But something was wrong. The ground beneath his feet felt uneven, hard, cold, paved with something aligned. He knelt and brushed the snow away with his hands. The cold pierced into his bones. Beneath the white surface, he saw carvings, names, dates, gravestones. The traveller staggered back, heart hammering. He looked up, and the coach was already leaving, its lanterns fading into the mist. He tried to shout, but the sound vanished. The wind returned slow and inescapable, covering everything in white once more. When morning came, the traveller woke lying in the snow, a thin layer of ice across his body. His clothes were soaked, his body ached, but his heart still beat. He rose slowly and saw the cabin roof in the distance. Staggering toward it, he felt the cold biting at the air. The man and woman welcomed him with startled eyes, as if seeing a ghost. "We thought you'd gone with them," she said. "I did," the traveller replied. "But I came back." The woodsman looked out the window where the storm was now only a memory. "Many years ago," he said, "a coach went over the cliff during a snowstorm like this. No one survived. Since then, sometimes, it rides again." The traveller said nothing. He simply extended his hands toward the fire and watched the flames flicker in the windows. For a moment, he swore he saw a light moving out there. 2 lanterns, swaying behind the veil of mist. He left at dawn without looking back. The rising sun melted the snow into silver threads, and the road ahead looked new. But the sound of hooves, once heard, never left him. Even on clear days, crossing bridges or valleys, he would feel the distant echo of an unseen coach. Time passed, memories blurred, but the cold of that night never left his skin. Some said it was a dream, others that he was saved by a miracle. But every time he told the story, the fire seemed to shiver, and on winter nights, when the wind blew from the north, the woodsman and his wife swore they could hear something in the valley, the rhythmic thud of hooves, the creak of wheels, the golden flicker of lanterns among the snow, and always, just before the sound vanished, a voice, low and almost a whisper, would drift through the pines. Not every journey ends at dawn. The Telltale Heart. The house was small, old, and held a silence that seemed to breathe. The dark wooden walls creaked with the cold of dawn. A clock marked the hours slowly, each tick spaced like a heartbeat. Outside, the wind rattled the window, and a candle trembled on the table. The man who lived there sat awake, unmoving, watching the half-dark. His eyes were sunken, his breath short, as if he feared the very air. It wasn't the cold that kept him awake, but a sound, small, rhythmic, relentless. At first he thought it was the clock. Then, the old man's heart in the next room. The old man, with his pale eye that never fully blinked, and the faint whisper of his breathing. There were days the man told himself he loved him. But when night came, that love became weight, and the weight became an idea, and the idea, a fever. It was a fever that didn't burn on the outside, but lit him from within, in the exact rhythm of the sound that never stopped. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Or perhaps thump-thump, thump-thump. Every night, at the same time, he rose without a sound. His steps, light, knew every board that creaked. He glided through the house like a shadow, breathing with the wind. He carried a covered lantern, letting escape only a needle-thin thread of light. Each night, he opened the old man's door a little more. He stood there, watching him sleep, listening to the breath rise and fall. His own heart beat fast, not with guilt, but with anticipation. It was a kind of silent ritual, like watching time before the harvest. The old man never noticed. The man told himself he did not wish to harm him, only to see if the eye would open, if that gaze would reach him in the dark. But each night the desire grew, like a shadow fed by the absence of light. And he began to wait for the moment the eye would see him, so he could finally make the sound stop. Because the sound came from there, it always came from there. On the 8th night, the old man woke. Perhaps he heard the clock, perhaps a finger's twitch, perhaps the silence between two breaths. The man froze in place. The lantern, in his trembling hand, let slip a beam of light that sliced the darkness. And the light found the eye, open, glassy, pale, inhuman. It did not blink. It was as though the old man saw him, and at the same time saw nothing at all. The man's entire body shivered. The sound began again, louder now, clearer. Thump, 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 thump. It was not the clock. It was the old man's heart, beating in fear, crying for help. But to the man, it was mockery, a laugh inside another's chest, and the more he tried not to hear it, the louder it grew, until everything inside him became rhythm. Despair took shape. He lunged forward, as though obeying an ancient command, a muffled cry, a blow, the creak of the bed, then silence. The candle flickered on the table, casting warped shadows on the walls. The man stood still, listening. Nothing. No wind, no heartbeat, no breath. The old man was still, and so was the world. For a moment, peace seemed possible, heavy but real. He drew a long breath and the air felt new, clean. Carefully, he covered the body and worked until dawn. The floorboards lifted easily. With every strike of the hammer, his heart grew calmer. When he finished, the floor looked just as before and the sun began to rise. He smiled. For the first time in days, he slept. The day passed as if nothing had changed. The house smelled of wood, dust, and coffee. The man sat at the table, steady hands, calm gaze. When someone knocked at the door, he did not startle. 2 police officers, polite, attentive. A neighbor had heard a cry in the night. Nothing suspicious, just routine. He welcomed them in with cordiality and a steady voice. He spoke of the old man, said he had gone traveling, showed them the rooms, the cupboards, the locked windows. Sunlight slipped through the cracks, and the air felt light. The policeman smiled, satisfied. Before they left, he invited them to sit. He brought chairs, offered wine, spoke about the weather. The clock ticked softly, marking the hour with innocent patience. Everything was perfect, until the ticking began to change its tone. At first, it was almost imperceptible, a muffled sound rising from beneath the floorboards, as if the clock, tired of counting time, had decided to beat to another rhythm. The man stopped speaking. The officers, distracted, didn't notice. But he did. Thump, thump. The pulse was slow, steady, pulling him downward, to the floor, to what lay beneath it. He tried to ignore it, smiled, joked, raised his voice, but the sound swelled, turning the air into a drum. The heart, once silent, began to live again. Thump, 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 thump. Each beat stronger than the last, each vibration closer to his own chest. The wine in the glasses trembled, and the man began to sweat. Conversation unraveled. The sound now filled the room, not as an echo but a presence. The policemen exchanged brief glances. Perhaps they sensed only discomfort, but he heard everything. The floor throbbed beneath his boots. The walls pulsed. The air ached. The sound blended with his own blood. He tried to laugh, but the laugh came trembling. Words slipped out, disordered. He spoke too loudly, too quickly. The heart seemed to answer, mocking, thump, 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 thump. Each beat a scream only he could hear. His mind, oversaturated, began to spin, and the sound, oh, the sound, became a multitude of pulses, an army beneath the floorboards, and he alone knew what marched below. Suddenly he could bear it no more. The calm he feigned shattered like glass. He stood, staggering, face pale, eyes wide. "Do you hear it?" he asked. The officers stared, confused. "Listen," he shouted, stomping the floor. There, beneath the boards. Silence lasted 1 second, the longest of his life. Then came the laugh that wasn't a laugh, the confession that wasn't words. "It's the heart," he screamed. "It still beats. Beneath the floor, the old man's heart." The officers recoiled, stunned, as he collapsed to his knees, his hands pressed to the floor, as if to silence the sound. But the beats continued, echoing, slowing, thump, 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 until they became nothing. Silence returned, heavy, absolute, almost compassionate. They dragged him away, and he did not resist. He seemed relieved, as though he had finally given the earth what it demanded. The candle went out by itself, casting the house back into shadow. Dust rose in tiny spirals, dancing in the cold air. The clock, indifferent, kept marking time. And for a moment, its ticking sounded like a tired heart. Outside, the day broke slowly, washing the night with pale light. The man looked through the window as they led him away. The house shrank in the distance, becoming only wood, wind, and silence. And inside it, the sound ceased for good. But in the back of his ear, a heartbeat still echoed. Faint, distant, persistent, as if time itself had learned the rhythm of guilt. Since then, they say the house remains empty. The windows creak. The clock has stopped. But those who pass at night swear they hear something. A soft sound, almost indistinguishable, mixing wind, memory, and fear. Not rain, not footsteps. Something else. Something that comes from within the walls, beneath the floor, from a point where time bends. Some call it illusion, others remembrance. But all in without exception feel the same chill when crossing that silent street. Because there are sounds that do not belong to the world of the living, and there are hearts that, even buried, continue to tell stories, thump, 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 until silence learns the rhythm, and finally it stops. And so, the candles go out one by one, like eyes finally allowed to close. The voices of legends retreat, content to have been remembered once more, and the night, once endless, begins to breathe again. The horseman returns to the fog, the count to the shadow of his castle, the creator to the silence of regret. The coach vanishes into the snow, and the heart at last learns to rest in the proper rhythm. Outside, the wind softens, stirring leaves across the path, and the distant call of crows yields to the gentle song of dawn. There's something curious about it. Even after so many tales of fear, what remains is a strange sense of peace, as if, by listening to the darkness, we remembered to light a candle within. Fear, after all, is just the nighttime disguise of curiosity, and every curiosity is a candle lit in a closed room. If these stories stayed with you until now, thank the night. It loves to be heard. And if you'd like to keep exploring this world of mystery and comfort, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, when another story calls for your attention, maybe a distant voice, a thunderclap, or just the sound of wind tapping at the window, you'll know where to find your way back. Now, take a deep breath. Let the silence finish the story for you. And remember, not every sound that comes from the dark is here to scare you. Some just want to make sure you sleep well.